slam! Oh my god,
Ladies and
dude.
gentlemen, we got him.
What's up, gamers? Welcome to the Ultimate Path of Exile 2 Survival Guide. As you can see, I've had my fair share of deaths learning how exactly to conquer this game in the most challenging game mode there is, hardcore, and I'm here to share those tips with you. I'll break down this video into 3 parts. The first section will cover general survivability tips that will always be applicable through the entirety of your playthrough. The second section will be how to beat the campaign and what bosses you should be looking out for. Finally, we'll end with maps and ultimately what you need to focus on as soon as you start to approach the end game. These are the 5 tips that I think are always applicable throughout the entirety of your hardcore playthrough and will be the make or break difference in surviving or dying in hardcore. The first is the most important, and that's always be moving. There is nothing more rippier than standing still in maps or when you're playing the campaign, and the amount of damage you mitigate by moving is going to be more than any defense you could ever possibly build. So always be moving or your character is going to suffer a lot of damage. The second tip is more of a psychological tip, but it's also incredibly important to think about while you're playing the game, especially on hardcore, and that is fast is slow, slow is fast. I know we often get tempted to want to blast through a map faster than we think we should. And when you do that in hardcore, you set yourself up for more mistakes, and those can be deadly. And so whenever you're thinking about playing the game on hardcore, just acknowledge that you are going to have to play slower than you might be used to if you were a softcore gamer, and that's okay. As long as you are alive, you are winning. If you are dead, you lose. And the only way to ensure that you are alive more than you are dead is to have methodical gameplay where you think before you act. So go slow. The third tip is that pausing is a must. Regardless of how you feel on the ethics of pause gameplay, Path of Exile 2 is a game that is literally balanced around the fact that you can pause the game at any moment and exit the character select to get out of a sticky situation that you know your character will die in. I understand some people might think that this is cheesy, but this is literally how the developers think about the game when they code in difficult challenges. So to not use this feature would be a misplay. Fourth tip, new league mechanics will kill you. Regardless of how tanky or how efficient you think you're playing, the new league mechanics are literally designed to kill you. And they might not always kill you because of some difficulty aspect. They oftentimes just kill you because they're bugged. The way GGG operates is they kind of fire from the hip when it comes to releasing new league and new league mechanics. And sometimes, almost all the times, the mechanics are not always right as soon as they get released, and there will be bugs that randomly one-shot your character thanks to the new league mechanics. And if you are interested in surviving for the longest time possible and making it as far as possible, avoiding the league mechanic is a great strategy and something that you should 100% do, especially while you're playing through the campaign. I know, cringe, but it's a must. And finally, you have to know which bosses can one-shot you. Unfortunately, there's just a lot of bosses in this game that will just one-shot your character, regardless of how much defense you have, or really anything really. And that's a whole other issue that I can get that I want to talk about. But you have to work around these things. And ultimately, if you know a boss is going to one-shot you, if you're playing through the campaign, you should be over-leveling and over-gearing it. And if you're encountering it through maps, you should just get out of the map, because it is not worth sacrificing dozens of hours of gameplay to a mistimed roll, which will end your character. It sucks. So don't get one shot by bosses. Know which bosses can one shot you and avoid them. Please subscribe. I've really enjoyed putting these last few videos together, and it really means a lot to see the support that I get from you guys. So please, if you can, subscribe. Now, let's get into your checklist that you should have up while you're leveling through the campaign. It's really simple, but if you hit these benchmarks, I guarantee your playthrough will be an incredibly smooth experience. The first thing you need to consider is that in Act 1, it's fairly easy as long as you're moving before you're attacking. You won't generally take damage. The exception being is the courtesans in the area right before the final boss fight. Those mobs leave certain kind of pools of shit on the ground, and it's really annoying, and it will deal damage. But outside of that, the act really isn't too bad. The one thing you should keep in mind as you get to the final boss is try to have at least 50 cold res. You don't need that much, but the last few phases, when he starts to do those icicle beams that fall from the ground, it's really easy to get hit by 2 or 3 and just end up dead. And if you have at least 50 cold res, you'll completely mitigate that from ever happening, and you'll have an incredibly easy time throughout the fight. In Act 2, this is when you really need to start focusing on armor. The first boss of Act 2 is essentially an armor check, and regardless of what character I'm playing, if I'm playing a witch, ranger, warrior, I'll be looking to at least get a few base armor items here to try my best to avoid getting one shot by the hyena, which is why armor is such a priority as soon as you begin Act 2 and before you fight the first boss fight. This is also the act where you actually do start to need to get some other resistances as well. It's fine if you sacrifice some of the cold res that you are stacking. Cold res is not going to be too important in Act 2. In Act 2, you really need to focus on fire res and lightning res. As long as those are 50 plus, you'll have a pretty easy time throughout the act. Act 3 is when gearing starts to become a little bit more of a challenge, specifically with the entry of chaos resistance items. Chaos resistance is hard to get on gear. And as long as you're able to find at least one piece of equipment that has some kind of chaos res on it, generally speaking, I look for an amethyst ring to solve this for me. You'll be fine with the Act 3 chaos damage, but you really do want at least one source of chaos defense or chaos resistance on your character throughout the act. Finally, this is also going to be a really important act to think about armor as your main source of defense. The Viper boss, people think that's a chaos damage boss, but really it's a physical damage boss. And so armor really helps lower the difficulty of the hardest encounters throughout really the entirety of the campaign experience. And so if you're struggling and you're playing like a witch or even a ranger, I would highly recommend investing into armor throughout the early acts of the campaign. It is just such a useful defense for the campaign. In Act 4, this is when you really want to start thinking about, finally, last note on Act 3 is that you really do need to get cap res. The last fight of Act 3 is essentially like a res check, the Doriani fight, and so you really should be trying to have at least, in the range of 65% plus res cap. I do try to just get res cap, and it's generally pretty straightforward, even on solo self-found hardcore, which is how I generally play the game. I'm able to pretty much cap my resistances by the end of Act 3 relatively easily. You will have to spend a little bit of time in gear, checking vendors and whatnot, but by the end of Act 3, you should have capped res. And then finally, in Act 4 / the interludes, this is when you can really start prioritizing like your base defense. So if you were building ES characters, this is where you really want to get more ES. If you were building an invasion-based character, you should be building a lot more evasion. And finally, if you are an armor character, you should be just trying to get as much armor as possible. This is where you're really going to start feeling the base level of defenses, and they're really important. So if you've been not paying attention to at least one of the base layer of defenses, Act 4 will punish you for it. And you really need to start thinking about which defense route you're going to go. Are you going to do armor, ES stacking, evasion, or hybrid options of each? Again, I would recommend armor just because it's the simplest one to think about. It mitigates all physical damage and is generally incredibly reliable through the campaign. Through the campaign asterisk, because it does fall off later, especially once you start getting into maps. And finally, Act 4 is also when you probably want to stop relying so much on life flasks for recovery, because the density of mobs becomes pretty aggressive in some of the Act 4 mobs where you're getting hit by a lot of mobs at once. And so if your character doesn't have a form of recovery, it's going to feel pretty annoying to play because your HP bar will keep spiking up and down, which is an uncomfortable feeling in hardcore. So you really want to prioritize at least some form of recovery, whether that's, ES on kill, life on kill, life regen. In my instance, I was playing a blood mage and I had like these blood globules that drop on the ground and restore my health. So think about some form of recovery once you get into Act 4 and cover through the interludes. Okay, we're now going to cover all of the Rippy campaign bosses chronologically. And we're going to start with the Act 1 boss Candlemass right before the final boss fight. And I'm starting with this guy only for one specific reason. It's when he bends down and does this move. That has the potential to one-shot your character if you're not standing behind it or standing in the right direction. So watch out. That will one-shot you. Keep that in mind as you're progressing through this fight. The next Rippy boss is going to be the Hyena boss as soon as you start Act 2. This red attack where he's doing right now, and if he lands the final one, that will one-shot pretty much all characters at this point in the game. If you do stack some armor though and have a little bit of plus life on gear, you will be able to mitigate the hit. So that's why I do recommend getting some armor before the fight, because it is really annoying getting to this point and then getting one shot by that red move. But if you have enough armor and life, it is actually fairly easy to mitigate if you're heading that direction. This fight is when paying attention to what the boss is saying in the chat box or in your audio queue is going to be very important. During this fight, he has one attack that has the potential to one-shot your character. It is the die, die, die attack. And you will see right on your screen that Risu will say run, and you'll hear her say run right before the attack starts. And in addition to the run audio cue, the boss will also shout die, die, die. So pay attention to that. If you run when that's starting, you'll avoid the boss. This next one I learned the hard way. I've never seen anyone die to this boss like this other than me, but PSA, this boss has the potential to one-shot your character only if you're standing next to that wall due to his shotgunning ability. The Titan boss is another rough one in Act 2. It has physical damage on the sword swing and drag, and that sword swing and drag, what he did right there on the screen, and he's doing right now, has the ability to one-shot your character, especially if you haven't invested a lot into armor. Luckily, it's fairly easy to avoid if you know what you're looking out for, but be aware of this boss. Do not be close to that sword, especially when he's pushing it forward or dragging it back. It will one-shot your character if you've poorly invested in armor or a lot of EHP. After the Titan boss, the bosses actually get a lot easier up until this point in Act 3 when you face Blackjaw the Remnant. He has a few attacks that just do a lot of physical damage and has the potential to one-shot your character, specifically his slam where he winds it up and does the kind of triple, back and forth thing with his big slams will one-shot you. So be careful about this boss. Stay away from that move. Yeah. So stay away from those big slams. He does have the potential to one-shot you. So be careful. The Trial of Chaos bosses and just the Trial of Chaos in general is another really rippy area in the game. Don't feel bad if you need to reset the zone. This is probably one of the harder boss fights, but I had really easy mods going into the fight. So if you have just bad options for your trial, just reset it. You don't lose your key to get back in, so you can just immediately go back in and try it again. I would never do a trial that's giving monsters like percentage chaos damage, or even like the volatiles on death are incredibly rippy. So be really careful about which modifiers you're selecting for the Trial of Chaos, and beware of the boss fights because a few of them are really rippy, like this one. The Act 3 Monkey in Jungle Ruins is probably the most infamous boss in the game right now, as it's probably responsible for the most hardcore deaths out of any boss in the game. And the only answer I have as far as how to avoid getting one-shot by this boss is just to avoid it when you first encounter with it and overgear and over-level it. I usually only fight this boss post Trial of Chaos. This character right here, I think, is around level 38 or 39 before I even thought about fighting the monkey. And I also try to stack as much armor as I possibly can before I fight this thing, because getting one shot by that huge slam really sucks. And the only way to really avoid it is stacking a bunch of armor, stacking a bunch of health, and overgearing and overleveling it. The Viper fight in Act 3 is another infamous boss fight, but I really don't think it's that bad, purely because it's really hard to get one shot during any of the moves that the Viper has, as long as you have a little bit of armor and chaos res. Usually how you die through this fight is attrition or getting comboed out after the soldiers all throw their spears. They do the final all throw spears in unison, and then right after they all throw their spears in unison, Viper will follow up with a combo like snake punch poison attack that does a lot of damage very quickly. And if you feel like you're going to get hit by it and you don't have enough HP pots, just hit escape and try it again. This is mostly an attrition based fight, where if you get the mechanics and learn the mechanics over time, do the right moves, it will die eventually. That ability is kind of the only way that you can get one shot in this fight, and as long as you have a little bit of armor and chaos res, it won't shot you. There really isn't another rippy boss up until you start to face Yama the White in the Hinakura area. And as long as you have a certain amount of chaos res, I think I did this fight without 23 chaos resistance on this character and a decent amount of life. It really wasn't that scary as long as you understand this mechanic. So I failed this mechanic right here because I was chasing one of the illusions with a blinking red dot. Do not follow the blinking red dot illusions. Follow the one that's not blinking red, and you will live that mechanic just fine. And that's really the only rippy mechanic in the entirety of the fight. So don't follow the illusion that is blinking red. The Benedictus fight is honestly more like a pinnacle boss than anything that should be matching a campaign boss, but whatever, we're totally here for it. And so the thing that kills most people in this fight is this mechanic right here. Benedictus will sometimes move to a certain point in the arena, and when he does that, he will emit a lightning bolt and then create a maze. When he first moves, you have to stand on top of him, and he will create the maze. Once he creates the maze after you stand on top of him, you then have to go through the maze. And if you successfully go through the maze, you'll avoid the mechanic. And it is a little bit confusing at times to know exactly where you should go. So, it's one of those things where if you feel like you're not getting it, immediately escape and just try it again. This boss is also very burstable too. It's really squishy, so you can do this boss by totally avoiding this phase if you have enough damage. Okay, this boss right here is personally responsible for probably one of my most annoying rips in the league so far, and countless of others have also died to this thing, both pre and post nerf. After the nerfs, this boss really isn't that bad, except for one specific ability that he does after the midway point in this fight. When he gets resurrected by the dude, he will say, a death of 1,000 sword, a death from every angle. And when he says death from every angle, that's when your alarm siren should be going off with, oh my god, okay, this is the move that's going to one-shot me. And as long as you are running, you should not be hit by that move. So as soon as you hear death from every angle, just keep your character moving. Don't stop to attack. Don't stop for anything. Just keep your character moving and wait for the animation. It's this attack right here. So just keep moving and you'll avoid that attack. That's the only thing that's really scary in this fight. His other moves don't really have the potential to one-shot you, but that death from every angle thing is still incredibly rippy, and it has one-shot many characters, including myself, this league. So be careful when he says that. And again, if you feel like you're not in the right position or you're screwing up as he's saying that line, again, feel free to just hit escape and reset it. It's totally fine. That's what PoE bossing is all about. Oh, and importantly, don't be like me. And when you actually kill the boss, make sure to complete the quest. The first time I killed this boss on this character, I actually forgot to click the Grand Baya after I killed this guy, and I had to do the fight again at level 64 after doing it at 60. And that was not fun, having to risk your character again to do this guy because you didn't click the thing the first time. So those are really all the rippy bosses as you fight through the campaign. if you died to a boss that wasn't in that list, I would be curious to know what exactly happened. So please let me know down below if you did indeed die to something that I didn't include. Finally, let's get into how to prepare your character for endgame maps, because this is something that, is still very much a work in progress, I think, for a lot of people, even myself, but I picked up a few tips and tricks that I can share with you along the way. The thing that will kill your character in Path of Exile 2 Hardcore Endgame is going to be a big source of physical damage hit. Generally speaking, elemental resistances do a really good job of mitigating most elemental damage in the game, meaning that for you to survive long term in the end game, you really need to concern yourself with surviving big physical hits more so than anything else. And that requires a plan, because saving yourself from a big physical hit is a lot easier said than done. On the screen right here is Quinn69's Thorn character, which was completely min-maxed around stacking as much armor as possible. And the reason I wanted to include this as far as showcasing you what you need to be thinking about as far as endgame maps is that, look, he has 20,000 armor. The items are like mirror tier armor items, and he only has 4.6k fizz max hit. That means if a boss slam that hits for 5,000 hits his character, he's going to die, regardless of how much armor he has. It's kind of crazy that armor is so ineffective against big hits, but that's just how the current armor stacking works in Path of Exile. And so generally speaking, you're going to need to have another plan outside of armor stacking to survive big physical hits. Now, you can get away with T15 mapping and T16 mapping in hardcore with a character like Quinn's. It'll be fine for the most part, but you'll just have to be super paranoid about a lot of the bosses that we just showcased. And essentially, if one of those bosses appear in your map, especially the big physical hitters like the monkey or the Furior Rage guy that you fight in the cemetery in the first act, like those bosses will just one-shot you because they're big physical damage hits, even if you're on a character like this with 20,000 armor. So what are the other ways that you could think about physical damage reduction outside of just armor? The current hardcore meta for surviving these big physical hits is energy shield stacking. Personally, I really don't like the playstyle of an energy shield character. I'm a life Andy, and so I don't go for this option, but if you are looking to just play the most meta thing possible and you want it to survive the longest possible in hardcore, your best bet would be some kind of energy shield stacking character. This is Alkaiser's Monk, who's currently around level 90s. And you can see, compared to Quinn's max hit, who has 20,000 armor, he has a 14k max hit versus Quinn's 4k max hit. And the reason he has a 14k max hit is because he has 14k energy shield. Alkaiser is literally mitigating 0 physical damage and is relying entirely on his EHP pool, which is just his base energy shield, to give him all of the physical reduction, or to give him all of the health that he would need to just survive the hit straight up. So his plan is to not even mitigate the physical nature of the hit and just survive it with a huge HP pool. Now, unfortunately, this isn't really practical for characters outside of energy shield stacking characters, because life-based characters don't really have a way to stack a bunch of life. The highest life-based characters are sitting around 4k life, and it's really hard to go beyond that. And so the current meta for hardcore progression and survivability is energy shield characters, just because there's literally no better way to mitigate physical damage than just stacking a bunch of EHP, and there's no way to stack EHP really other than being an energy shield character. So energy shield meta is the meta for surviving late game maps. But there are other options that I wanted to showcase because they're the ones that I'm currently using. I think it's some pretty cool tech. So we're currently looking at my Blood Mage character that's currently still alive, level 85 in the hardcore, 84 in the hardcore league. And you'll see I have 772 armor, but my Fizz max hit is 7.4k, about 3k higher than Quinn, who had 20k armor. And now it's still not as high as Alkaiser's, who has about 14k due to his huge EHP pool. You see our life pool is only 3.2k, although that's a little, I have to make an asterisk on that because I do have Giant's Blood enabled, and currently POB does not calculate that the strength is half. So my sitting total life is actually 2.8k, but because I'm a Blood Mage, whenever I'm mapping, I usually end up around like 4.1k life because of the blood globules effect right here. And so with 4.1k life, that means my Fizz max is closer to like 8 to 9k ish. And so how is a character with no armor and kind of a mediocre life pool getting so much physical reduction? Well, let me show you. The way I'm building my character to survive big physical hits is through raw PDR on gear. And there's a few unique items that I have that really help take huge maximum physical hits that I want to showcase because I don't think they really get enough love for how awesome these items are. Now, the first one is the more common one that you'll see that has more of a reputation among PoE players. Cloak of Flame was something that was around in the original Path of Exile game, and it was always super potent there, and it's even more potent in Path of Exile 2 because we just saw, big thanks to Quinn's showcase, how poorly stacking armor does against physical damage reduction. But when you have a stat like this, 40% of physical damage taken as fire damage, that means I'm essentially mitigating like 40% of Fizz damage. Like a 5,000 Fizz hit is now going to hit me for like 3k because I'm taking so much of that as fire damage, and that fire damage is being mitigated by my fire resistance, which is 75%. Smarter people than me could get into the weeds of all of this math stuff and how it works, but the general gist is whenever you're turning physical damage into elemental damage, letting your elemental resistances mitigate part of the physical damage hit for you, that's going to be an incredibly effective level of defense against physical damage because of how hard it is to mitigate just raw physical damage. So items like Cloak of Flame, Lightning Coil, which takes physical damage as lightning damage, these are going to be amazing items for hardcore characters and essentially items that you should think about building around as far as your resource for mitigating physical damage, especially if you're a life-based character, which I currently am. The other really interesting, unique item that I've become a big fan of is the Hollow Mask, which gives you just a flat 15% PDR. This item alone gives me about like plus 900 to my max hit, which is pretty absurd given that it's such an easy to find unique, and I got a nice corrupt as far as the spirit option on this guy. So I really think whenever you see flat physical reduction, so that flat 15% additional physical damage reduction, that means like it's not checking armor. So regardless of how much armor I have, I'm getting just a flat 15% PDR on hits, which is an incredibly effective stat, again, given how we just saw how ineffective armor is. And so just these flat stats, it says 15% additional physical damage reduction, is like having 10,000 armor. It's ridiculous. And just the last thing I wanted to showcase on the Blood Mage and pretty much why I love this class so much in terms of its survivability is this node right here, 25% of life loss from hits is prevented, and that much is lost over 4 seconds instead. Again, is another source of like PDR, because instead of just taking the huge Fizz hit, we're literally taking 25% of it later, meaning like as long as you have some form of recovery, which is really easy to get on a Blood Mage or click a Life Flask, you're essentially mitigating freely 25% of that huge Fizz hit where armor would be 0 and effective. So again, this node is one of the big reasons why our character, who again has 0 armor, is able to have a Fizz max hit that's 7.5k. So this has been the ultimate survival guide for Path of Exile 2. Thank you guys for sticking around. If you're still here, please drop me a subscribe. I will be posting Path of Exile 2 content all day, every day. So please subscribe, and any kind of engagement I get, I really appreciate. So thank you guys for sticking around this long, and stay tuned for the next video where I showcase this character a little bit more as I get min-max in the hardcore endgame. Stay tuned.